The sun slanted through the high windows of the Red Keep's great hall, shimmering across newly polished marble and tapestries that bore a golden stag crowned in glory. Sounds of footsteps echoed against the walls. Still an unfamiliar hush for those who remembered the days of Targaryen rule. Yet now, in this changed era, the Iron Throne belonged to Robert of House Baratheon, who had seized it through rebellion and bloodshed, only to seal his triumph by wedding Lyanna Stark. This was not the arrangement once shaped by illusions of love between the Wolf Maid and Rhaegar Targaryen, nor the dire tragedy that nearly came to pass. Instead, here they stood on the cusp of a new age. Here was King Robert, broad-shouldered and boisterous, a man with a grin that could chase away shadows, crowned in the glory of the sunlit hall. And beside him was Queen Lyanna, dark-haired and fierce-eyed, whose heart still beat with northern blood, determined to shape the realm's future in ways no one could easily foresee. On this morning, the clang of mailed guards was subdued, a quiet that announced the calm after war's storms. Along the polished floors strode Eddard Stark, Warden of the North, bearing the same stark solemnity as the direwolf emblazoned on his tunic. So much had changed. He was no longer simply the loyal brother. He was now the hand of the king, an unexpected shift he never sought, but could not refuse when Robert insisted. His once tired eyes found relief in the sight of his sister, standing tall beside the Iron Throne. She looked well, or at least well enough. Her wedding garb had been stored away. The feast was done. Now came the days after, when the weight of a kingdom's crown found its place. Robert slouched on the Iron Throne in a posture that would have scandalized the Targaryen kings of old. Yet it was impossible to ignore the confidence that radiated off him. The strength in his bull neck and brawny arms, the same vigor that had carried him through countless battles. In a move that spoke volumes about the way this new king would rule, his hand rested not on the edges of the throne's sharp blades, but comfortably on the armrest, as though iron spikes posed no threat to his hide. Or perhaps he simply did not care. The day's business had begun. The hall was largely empty, but for a handful of lords lingering by the foot of the throne, awaiting the king's justice, or perhaps his favor. Lyanna stood to his left. A swirl of silver fox fur trimmed her dark blue gown, reminiscent of the north. She still wore a simple circlet of gold, rather than the heavier royal crown, a deliberate choice by both her and Robert to ease her into this new life. For a moment she felt the chill of memory, recalling the dire events that had almost led to her death, or worse, hidden captivity. That was behind her now, banished to a place she refused to dwell on. She stood with a queen's composure, glancing occasionally at her brother, whose presence brought her comfort in this foreign city. Eddard cleared his throat, bowing first to the king and then more subtly to his sister. The small party of lords, lesser knights and stewards parted ways for him, their heads dipping in respect as they caught sight of the direwolf emblem. Robert, shifting his weight, addressed Ned warmly. "My friend," he rumbled, "is there aught of importance this morning? My belly's grumbling. We ought to get through court quickly before we break fast with the council." Lyanna stifled a small smile. She'd come to know Robert's sense of humor well enough by now, far more jovial than the northern men she grew up around. War had shaped him, yes, but there was a hearty life within him that refused to be quenched. Some days she wasn't sure if she found it endearing or exasperating. Yet when she recalled the horrors they had faced, the heartbreak that had nearly torn the realm apart, his loud laughter could almost feel like a blessing. Eddard straightened, his jaw tense. "There's the matter of the harvest in the Crownlands, Your Grace. Lord Rosby arrived at dawn to speak of it. Also, a merchant from across the narrow sea has petitioned to meet with you about a certain venture in King's Landing." "Nalinder," Robert grunted. "Rosby first, then. Let's be done with it." At that moment, Lyanna felt the subtle shift in the hall. She stepped forward, an undercurrent of her father's measured discipline guiding her. "Lord Rosby," she called in a clear voice, "you may approach the throne." A pale, tall man with a bony face advanced, bowed deeply, and began his appeal. He spoke of black soil parched by unseasonal dryness, of a shortage of seeds, and how the local fisherfolk had difficulty meeting taxes. The words washed over Robert and Lyanna in a wave of mild anxiety. For though Robert had proven himself in war, it was these smaller, everyday issues of governance that truly tested a monarch's mettle. Lyanna listened keenly, her eyebrows knitting. The North was different. Her father had always told her that even the smallest harvest could mean life or death. She took note of how the same was true here, though the climate was gentler and the population denser. Robert nodded, though his patience seemed to wane. "Lord Rosby, I'll have you work with my hand and with the Master of Coin. The crown cannot see its people starve, but neither can we simply shovel out gold to anyone who claims a poor harvest. Provide the details, and here we'll see it addressed." Ned inclined his head in acknowledgement. Lyanna, sensing Robert's desire to keep the proceedings short, added softly, "Should you find conditions beyond your management, we will look into shipping extra stores from the Reach. But we must verify the shortage." Relief flickered across Lord Rosby's face. He bowed low again before stepping back. Lyanna felt Robert's hand lightly graze hers, perhaps unconsciously, in a gesture of approval. Though fleeting, it sent a curious warmth through her chest. She reminded herself that this union was born of necessity, forged in the fires of rebellion and tragedy. Yet, day by day, she felt that a true bond between them might be possible. Perhaps this was how alliances turned into marriages that became something real. At length, the morning's petitions concluded, and the smaller lords withdrew, leaving only the steadfast presence of the Kingsguard stationed around the room. Eddard lingered, stepping closer to the dais. Robert exhaled deeply, as if shedding the weight of the realm for a moment. "Bloody hell, Ned," he muttered. "I'd rather swing a hammer all day than shuffle through grain counts." A trace of a smile tugged at the corners of Ned's mouth. "There will be time for both if you so desire. The realm is still raw from the war, Your Grace. People look to you for guidance. A hammer might keep invaders at bay, but it won't fill empty bellies." Robert flicked a glance toward Lyanna, his eyes dancing. "How does my northern queen find life in King's Landing? Have you grown tired of all these courtesies and petty squabbles?" She met his gaze, unflinching. "I never shy from a challenge," she answered, voice evenly measured. "And I won't start now." They exchanged a look that was complicated, a shared acknowledgement of their positions. Eddard, sensing their silent conversation, murmured that he would see to the Master of Coin regarding Lord Rosby's situation. Then he bowed to them both, and left. With the great hall emptying, Robert stood from the Iron Throne, stretching his arms as if they ached from inactivity. His crown shone in the high sunlight, the metal of it recently wrought, with gold antlers that gleamed. He stepped down to where Lyanna waited at the base of the dais. "Let's walk," he said. They strolled side by side through the corridors of the Red Keep, each step echoing behind them. Servants gave way, bowing or curtsying. The hush of anticipation in every corridor was like a whisper of old ghosts who once inhabited these halls. Lyanna felt tension behind her ribs as she recalled the Targaryen presence that loomed, though she had never quite belonged to it. At times, she found herself pausing near stained glass windows that depicted dragons in flight, thinking of how close she had come to a life entirely different. She steeled herself. That was finished. She was here. Robert led her toward the Royal Solar, a chamber that overlooked Blackwater Bay. The midday light gleamed off the water and cast sparkles across the broad desk, where official papers lay in waiting. A gentle breeze floated through the open windows, stirring the curtains in a soft dance. Once the doors closed behind them, Robert seemed to breathe easier, shrugging off the formal posture he wore in court. He turned to her, reaching for her hands. He held them in his calloused grip, looking down at her with a glint in his eyes. She stiffened momentarily but didn't pull away. The memory of her father's discipline, of her brother's protectiveness, mingled in her mind with the reality of standing here now as Robert's queen. She gazed at him, studying the scars that war had left. She remembered the man who had set the realm aflame after he believed her kidnapped. The man whose fury had shattered the Targaryen's hold. The man who had once been promised to her before she'd ever met Prince Rhaegar. Her heart had been tossed about by illusions, but now she stood before a living truth. "You've changed," she said in a quiet tone. Not an accusation, but an observation. Robert snorted, giving her hands a small squeeze. "I was but a reckless warrior when we were first betrothed. Time and war have ways of burning off what's unneeded. The real question is, do you like what remains? She wasn't certain how to answer that. Instead, she gently extricated her hands from his. What I think matters less than what the realm requires, she replied, brushing her hair away from her face. But I will say this, we must work together. I won't be a silent queen. He chuckled warmly. I expect nothing less from the she-wolf of the north. And I'd have it no other way. Nitar. A silence settled between them, not uncomfortable but laden with possibilities. She turned toward the window, glancing out at the bay, where ships bobbed in the harbor. The sea was calm, flecked with white gulls. She wondered what storms might be brewing beyond the horizon. Before either could speak again, there came a soft knock. A young steward, all nerves and quick bows, entered to announce that the small council awaited the king's presence in the council chambers. Robert gave a good-natured roll of his eyes and inclined his head toward Lyanna as if to say, "Shall we?" She nodded, and they proceeded to the council chamber together. The room was circular, dominated by a large table. Sunlight slanted in through tall, narrow windows. Stannis Baratheon, Lord of Dragonstone, rose stiffly when they entered, inclining his head to Robert and only giving a slight nod to Lyanna. Beside him, Renly Baratheon, the youngest brother, lounged with a more casual, handsome grace. He flashed a warm grin at Lyanna. Lord Varys stood to one side, hands folded in his voluminous sleeves, while Pycelle cleared his throat from the other end, gray brows drooping over watery eyes. Littlefinger was absent, likely off attending to the city's coin or something else cunning. Robert took his seat at the head of the table, with Lyanna just to his right. Stannis sat on the king's left, and the others situated themselves as decorum dictated. The meeting began with a flurry of talk about the cost of repairs to certain towers in the Red Keep, each line item pricking at Robert's patience. He leaned back, letting Stannis, Varys, and Pycelle debate over figures. Renly occasionally interjected with a quip about flamboyant tournaments he believed would bring fresh life to the city, though his older brother gave him a withering look, suggesting more pressing needs demanded the gold first. Lyanna listened intently, absorbing the language of governance that was entirely foreign to her. In Winterfell, she had witnessed her father's sense of justice and duty, but never had she been exposed to this swirl of calculations, negotiations, and subtle manipulations. She noted how Robert delegated to Stannis, how Varys smiled at them all with a mysterious tilt to his lips, how the tension in the room thickened whenever certain matters of the realm's finances arose. She recognized that among them all, Ned would have been the calm anchor to keep Robert grounded. But Ned was off dealing with smaller lords, leaving her to navigate by instinct. I suggest, Pycelle droned, his voice like dusty parchment, that His Grace consider a measured approach to the city's expansion. Overreaching too soon, especially after the devastation of war, could be ill-advised. Robert waved a hand in vague assent but said, "We'll revisit it. I have more pressing concerns. Word from the Stormlands is that some lords loyal to the Targaryens are still skulking about, undermining my authority. They speak of Viserys, that little whelp, as if he's the rightful king." At the mention of the exiled Targaryen, a hush settled. Lyanna felt her heart jolt. Though she kept her expression calm, she'd heard the name in passing, usually accompanied by grim mutterings, that the last Targaryen children had been whisked away across the sea. Viserys and his sister Daenerys, or so rumor said. For a moment, she pictured golden hair, lilac eyes, the dragon's blood. She forced her mind back to the present. Renly tapped his fingers on the table, glancing at Lyanna in a way that seemed to measure her reaction. Rumors surface everywhere, brother. But rumors are not men with swords. The Targaryens have no army, no ships, nothing but illusions of grandeur. We shouldn't waste coin chasing shadows. Nanum. Stannis scowled. And if those shadows turn into a real threat, you'll regret not stamping them out. He turned his dark-eyed gaze to Robert. We must remain vigilant. You recall how quickly a single rumor set all of this in motion. Robert's eyes slid to Lyanna for an instant, a memory they both understood. Her disappearance, the events that had sparked the rebellion. He tightened his jaw. Yes, we remember. But that's not the only reason we won. The realm was tired of a mad king. Targaryen rule was rotting from within. If Viserys tries anything, we'll send him scurrying back into exile. Nyam. From his position by the window, Varys cleared his throat with a delicate sound. If it pleases your grace, he said softly, my little birds have been hearing whispers that certain lords in the Reach and even in Dorne harbor a fondness for the old dynasty. They might not move openly, but their sentiments have not died. Best not to sow complacency. Robert gave a perfunctory nod. We remain on guard then, but no rash action. The realm needs peace. A strong harvest. Rebuilding. I'll not plunge us into chaos chasing children across the sea. Nenmaru. Lyanna listened, absorbing each mention of the exiled Targaryens and the realm's undercurrents of unrest. She recalled the illusions that once swirled around Rhaegar. The beloved prince, the man who had captured her attention, her curiosity, her fleeting heart. Shaking off that memory, she straightened her spine and said, then we must see that the people have something to hope for in this new reign, so that they do not yearn for old ghosts. All eyes turned to her. Even Stannis seemed taken aback by her directness, and Robert looked at her with a sort of pride. She continued, voice steady. We cannot feed all with talk of tournaments, but neither can we ignore that the common folk need signs of prosperity. Give them reason to believe in a Baratheon crown, strengthen alliances with the great houses, ensure the flow of grain, support the roads. People will welcome peace if we show them it's here to stay. There was a moment of silence, and then Robert let out a hearty laugh. Well spoken, my queen. Perhaps we should see you seated on the council as well. Nestern? A faint flush rose to Lyanna's cheeks, but she appreciated that Robert did not mock her. On the contrary, he seemed invigorated by her candor. Stannis kept silent, but he studied her with new interest, as if measuring whether she was a mere figurehead or a real presence to be reckoned with. Renly's grin widened, and Varys' smile grew mysterious. Pycelle murmured something about tradition, but Robert cut him off with a jovial wave. Business continued, with matters of trade and navy repairs. By the end of it, the group dispersed, each man returning to his duties. Lyanna stood, trying to hide the mental weariness that threatened to creep over her. She was used to the freedom of riding across the snow-covered fields of the north, with the wind in her hair. Now she felt the claustrophobia of politics pressing down, demanding from her a cunning she wasn't entirely sure she possessed. Once outside, Robert placed a guiding hand on her lower back as they walked. You have a good sense for these things, he said, sincerity warming his tone. Your father taught you well, or maybe your mother. Someone taught you how to see the broader field, like a general planning a campaign. Lyanna tilted her head. They taught me to do my duty, to think of the people I care for. Is that not enough? He smiled, a rare tenderness passing across his rugged features. Perhaps it is. Come. We've more than enough time to go to the training yard. I've not had a good spar in days, and I'd wager you're missing the feel of a blade in your hand. She blinked, surprised, then nodded. The idea of losing herself in physical exertion, even if only to watch, appealed to her. Together, they strode to the yard, where the clank of steel on steel mingled with shouted orders and the whir of arrows from the archery butts. A few knights paused mid-swing to bow as their king and queen approached. Robert dismissed the formalities with a casual wave of his hand. He spotted a rack of tourney swords, blunted steel, made for safe practice, and his eyes gleamed with an unspoken challenge. He picked up one, tested its balance, and tossed another to Lyanna. She caught it deftly, the weight familiar in her grasp, though it had been a while since she'd properly practiced. She had always been more comfortable with a light blade for quick footwork, but she was no stranger to the heavier swords that men used. The courtyard formed a circle around them, soldiers and courtiers giving them a wide berth but also eager to see their new king and queen spar. Robert hoisted the sword to his shoulder and with a roguish grin said, "Show me the she-wolf's bite." Her heartbeat quickened. She assumed a defensive stance, one foot sliding back, sword angled across her body. Robert lunged first, testing her reflexes with a lazy overhead swing. She pivoted neatly, the blade glancing off hers with a dull clang. A ripple of admiration ran through the onlookers. He came again, this time with more force, and she felt the jolt up her arms. But she set her jaw, adjusting quickly. She was smaller, lighter, and she could use that to her advantage. She feinted to his left, then sidestepped around him, using the flat of her blade to tap his ribs. He let out a bark of laughter and circled, sizing her up. For a while, they moved in a testing dance, steel glimmering in the bright courtyard. She recognized that he held back his full strength, but she didn't mind. She, too, tested the edges of her skill, letting her mind slip into that cool focus she once found when practicing in Winterfell's yard with her brothers. The watchers might have expected an easy display, but the two of them gave a performance that set tongues wagging. They parried, blocked, advanced, and retreated, each measuring the other's capabilities. Eventually, with a final, clever shift of her weight, Lyanna slipped under Robert's guard and brought her sword close to his chest. She halted, panting, a triumphant gleam in her gray eyes. Robert stood very still, sweat gleaming on his brow, chest heaving beneath his tunic. Then he broke into a booming laugh that startled the ravens perched on the walls. He held up his hands in mock surrender. "I yield to the queen," he announced with a grin, though the watchers clapped politely. She withdrew her blade, feeling the stir of pride and noticing the warmth in her limbs, a reminder that she was still alive, still capable. Robert gestured for a squire to bring them water. As the boy rushed forward, Robert took the cup first, drank, then handed it to Lyanna, who accepted it gratefully. The cool liquid was a relief against her dry throat. When she lowered the cup, she caught Robert's gaze, intense and approving. "You fight well," he said in a quieter tone. "I knew you did, from the first time I heard about the she-wolf who'd rather ride and fence than embroider. Yet seeing it with my own eyes is something else." "Man." He reached out, brushing a strand of sweat-damp hair from her face. The gesture was almost tender, and the courtyard's bustle seemed to fade for an instant, leaving just the two of them. She swallowed hard, uncertain what to say, how to interpret the swirl of emotion within her. Then, from the edge of the yard, a stern voice called, "Your Grace!" They both turned to see Eddard Stark standing there, arms folded, a faintly amused expression on his otherwise solemn features. He bowed, adding, "My sister has always been quick on her feet." Robert chuckled. "Aye, that she is. She might best any man in this yard." He gave Lyanna's shoulder a warm squeeze. Then, stepping away, he called for someone to clear a path. Eddard approached, greeting his sister quietly. "Is all well?" Lyanna asked, noticing a faint tension around Ned's mouth. He gave a slow nod. "It is, though I've been in discussion with Lord Tywin Lannister about certain matters. He wishes to speak with you and Robert regarding potential alliances." "Nor." The mention of Tywin Lannister made Robert's broad grin dim slightly. The war was over, but the tension with House Lannister was not so easily resolved. The sack of King's Landing had left scars, not just on the city but on the pride of many. Yet Tywin was needed, for his gold, for his power. Robert's face darkened briefly, but he shrugged it off. "Very well," he said. "We'll meet the old lion if that's what must be done. But not this moment. I've had enough talk of coin and alliances for one day." "Manner." Ned inclined his head in agreement. "I'll arrange a time for later in the week. I simply wished you to know." Lyanna's mind flickered with possibilities. She had heard many unsettling stories of Tywin Lannister, the proud, calculating warden of the West, whose ambition ran deep. He had come late to join the rebellion, only when it was all but decided. Now, with Robert crowned and the Targaryens fallen, Tywin's cunning would not rest idle. She sighed quietly, acknowledging that her position as queen would force her to tread carefully around such men. A hush fell among them as a warm breeze stirred the courtyard. She found herself glancing at Robert, who, despite the sword practice, still radiated an unspent energy, a king's restlessness. She wondered how he would handle the unending swirl of politics that threatened to drown a warrior's spirit. Perhaps that was why he valued Ned, and maybe even her, to help him navigate what lay ahead. "I'll go change," she said softly. returning the blunted sword to a waiting page. "Then we can break our fast together, Robert, if you will. We've a day yet to see to these matters." Robert bowed his head in a mock flourish, the grin returning. "Your wish is mine to grant, my queen." As she left the yard, she felt the weight of many gazes tracking her steps. Servants and guards parted before her. She kept her chin high, ignoring the flutter of uncertainty in her stomach. She passed through corridors lit by narrow windows, the day's light painting shifting patterns on the stone. There were places here that still bore the tarnish of Targaryen sigils, half-burned tapestries removed, replaced with stags. The ghosts of the old dynasty lingered, and she was reminded how swiftly fortunes could change. When she reached her chambers, she dismissed the waiting maids politely. She needed a moment alone. The weight of her new life pressed in on her. She wandered to the far side of the room, gazing out through a tall window that overlooked the city. Sprawling streets and crooked alleys twisted below, far different from the open spaces of the north. Beyond the walls, the sea glittered under the midday sun. She let out a slow breath, remembering fleeting images of her past. Laughing beside Ned, joking with Benjen, stifling the urge to dance when a lively tune filled Winterfell's great hall, feeding the hungry pups in the kennels. And yes, fragments of memory of Rhaegar, the sad-eyed prince, who had read her too many songs and poems under starlit skies. Yet he was gone, and she had made her choice. Or perhaps the choice had been made for her by war and duty. Still, she had walked willingly enough into it in the end, and she would see it through. A faint stir in the next room reminded her that she could not dwell on these memories too long. She would see them not as regrets, but as lessons. People depended on her now. She was queen, married to Robert Baratheon, a man she was learning to understand day by day. In that understanding, perhaps they would find true companionship, the kind that could guide a kingdom from the ashes of rebellion. She changed into a fresh gown of deep red velvet, trimmed with black fur. Her nod to House Baratheon's colors combined with her northern heritage. A slender belt shaped of gold antlers circled her waist, a gift from Robert. She brushed her hair until it shone, letting it fall freely about her shoulders. Despite her intense desire for solitude, she knew she must return to the king's side and present a visage that inspired confidence. This was her duty, the vow she had made. Before stepping out, she caught her reflection in a polished metal mirror. She tried to see herself as others did, a maiden of the north turned queen. Her features were proud, her eyes direct, her hair a dark cascade. She still recognized the fierce spirit within, the refusal to bow to fear. She would need that boldness now. When she emerged, she was greeted by a pair of gold cloaks standing guard. They bowed low. She inclined her head politely and moved through the corridors again, heading to the king's private dining hall. A hush of footsteps on stone, a swirl of trailing fabric, the flicker of torches lining the walkway. At every turn, she saw the sigils that had replaced dragon iconography, heard the faint echoes of the shifting power in the realm. Perhaps eventually she would grow used to it. She found Robert seated at a large table laden with roasted meats, fresh bread, and a variety of fruits. Eddard was there as well, subdued as always. Robert seemed to be in high spirits from the sparring session. He beckoned her over with a grin, standing as she approached. She took a seat near him, and immediately a servant poured wine into her goblet. "Good of you to join us, sister," Ned said with a gentle nod. Robert gestured to the spread. "Come, eat. You must be hungry after besting me in the yard. I swear the whole realm will be buzzing with tales of my queen's prowess." Lyanna smirked, taking a modest slice of bread. "Careful, or they'll think you weak if a woman can defeat you." He laughed, loud and unfettered. "Let them say it. I'll prove otherwise to any fool who doubts me." Ned sipped from his cup, eyes flicking between them, and asked quietly, "Are we prepared to face Lord Tywin later this week? He's not a man to be trifled with, nor does he have patience for unsteady rule." "Elaine?" Robert's smile slipped a fraction. He reached for a flagon and refilled his own wine cup. "The man can wait until we're good and ready. He'll show patience if he wants to keep his family in favor." Lyanna, always intuitive when it came to reading her brother's mood, felt the tension rising between Robert's impulsive nature and Ned's cautious approach. She placed a hand on Robert's arm. "We should at least give him a courteous reception," she said, her tone carefully neutral. "The war is done, but the scars remain. A show of unity might help soothe the realm." Robert studied her, then nodded slowly. "Fine. Courteous enough, though I've little taste for pleasantries." They ate in companionable silence for a few moments, the mood subdued yet not entirely grim. Lyanna savored a few bites of spiced chicken and sipped her wine. She felt a gentle stirring of gratitude that she had Ned here with her, and that Robert, boisterous though he was, did try to heed her counsel. Once the meal wound down, they spoke of smaller matters. The possibility of hosting a modest tourney in King's Landing to celebrate the new reign. The need for better roads between the capital and the Stormlands. The upcoming wedding of a lesser cousin to one of Ned's bannermen. The conversation meandered until Robert excused himself to tend to some hunting hawks recently sent as a gift from the Vale. He invited Ned to join him, leaving Lyanna to her own devices for the afternoon. She decided a quiet walk through the castle gardens might restore a bit of the north in her heart. She found the gardens a curious mix of southern vibrancy and cultivated designs. Flowers in bright hues of red and gold flourished among trimmed hedges, with hidden alcoves that offered a semblance of privacy in the bustling fortress. She wandered deeper until she discovered a solitary corner where a small fountain trickled over smooth stones. A figure stood there, back turned to her, dressed in plain robes. She paused, uncertain. Then the figure turned, revealing Varys, the spymaster. He smiled, folding his hands within his wide sleeves. "Your Grace," he purred, bowing smoothly. Lyanna gave a cautious nod. "Lord Varys." He glided a step closer. "I do apologize if I startled you. I come here sometimes to think, to listen to the birds and the breeze. It is amazing what secrets nature can share." She studied him, remembering how in the council he had spoken of his little birds. Now they were alone. The idea both intrigued and unsettled her. "And is that why you're here now? Listening for secrets?" He gave a self-effacing grin. "The secrets of the flowers, perhaps. The world of men is so loud with their politics and posturing. But in quiet spaces, truths often reveal themselves." "That I'm sure." She did not fully trust him, for Ned had warned her that Varys was cunning, loyal only to the realm, or so he claimed, and that no one truly knew his motives. Yet she was not afraid. She lifted her chin. "And do you have some wisdom you wish to share with me, Master of Whisperers?" He looked down as though demurring. "Only that times of transition are delicate. The realm looks to its new queen for guidance, as well as to its king. The seeds sown now will flourish in the future, or they may wither if neglected. You understand, I think. Your presence here is quite important." She listened carefully. "I'll do my duty." He nodded. "I've no doubt. And if ever you find yourself in need of certain information or wish to clarify rumors, my ears are open." He smiled, but it was a smile without warmth. "I serve the crown, after all." She inclined her head in acknowledgement, neither accepting nor rejecting his offer. Soon, he drifted away, as quietly as a shadow. Lyanna exhaled, feeling the tug of weariness settle over her. She wanted to trust in the realm's new leadership, in Robert's victory. But she suspected there were many hidden corners in King's Landing where loyalty was uncertain. Continuing her walk, she let her thoughts roam. Robert was a good man at heart, a soldier crowned by victory, forging a new path with her at his side. She would not let the shadows of the past devour her. Perhaps in time they would all find a balance. She recalled the rush of adrenaline when she bested him in the yard. The genuine admiration in his voice as he laughed. That was a man she could stand beside, if he would only guard the realm with the same fierce dedication. Still, she knew the burdens were heavy. She had glimpsed a faint sorrow in Robert's eyes whenever he thought her unguarded, as though haunted by ghosts of the friends he had lost or the illusions he had once cherished. Maybe he too was haunted by the memory of what might have been, just as she was. Yet, every day, they had a chance to shape what their marriage could become. By the time she returned to her chambers, A sense of resolute calm had taken hold of her. She found a short note from Ned, indicating that he and Robert would be occupied until sundown, and she was free to do as she wished. Removing the gold antler belt, she settled into a chair by the window, letting her gaze sweep the city once more. She imagined the small folk in their market stalls, the blacksmiths' forges glowing, the fishwives hawking their daily catch. All these people looked to their king and queen, for better or worse. She would not fail them. Thoughts fluttered over the uncertain alliances that must be tended, the looming figure of Tywin Lannister demanding an audience, the Targaryen children rumored to still live across the sea. The realm's peace was precarious, and she understood that, but she felt no urge to run or hide from it. She was a Stark of Winterfell, as her father had reminded her so often, and Starks did not flinch from adversity. She closed her eyes briefly, letting the sun's warmth fall on her cheeks. In the hush of that moment, she sensed she was neither the frightened girl kidnapped by a prince, nor the rebellious daughter who had once run from her obligations. She was Queen Lyanna now, and she would be strong. As Robert told her, she had the she-wolf's bite, and if the realm required it, she would bare her teeth at any threat that lurked. Evening's approach drew her from her reverie. She rose to prepare for the night's gathering. There would be a small supper with invited lords and ladies, a routine of courtly pageantry that still felt odd to her. But she would endure it, as she endured everything else. Stepping out, she caught the faint scent of salt air from the bay below, mixing with the sweet perfumes that drifted through the castle corridors. A swirl of life, and conflict, and hope. She walked with steady steps, making her way to the great feasting hall. Torches already burned in brackets along the walls, their flames casting dancing shadows. A tapestry in the corner depicted Robert's stag triumphant, overshadowing a dragon. She paused there, hands clasped before her, and let out a small sigh. Sometimes she wished none of this had happened. The war, the heartbreak, the complicated knot of alliances. But life seldom granted second chances. Then she heard the echo of Robert's laughter somewhere ahead, the rumble of it soothing in its own rough way. She straightened her shoulders, resolved to see her new path through. She was queen of the Seven Kingdoms, and if her union with Robert was the price for peace, she would pay it, and perhaps find more than simple duty within their marriage. As she stepped forward, guards in gold-trimmed cloaks pulled open the doors, revealing the sparkling interior of the feasting hall. Laughter, music, and the warm glow of candlelight flowed out to greet her. She lifted her chin and entered, the eyes of courtiers and lords alighting on her. She felt the hush of expectation move across the hall, and she returned their stares with quiet confidence. The king spotted her, raising his cup in greeting, a broad grin lighting his face. She moved to join him, the murmur of conversation rising once more. Let them talk, she thought. Let the world watch. She and Robert had a kingdom to guide. Winter was far off, and there was time yet to shape a prosperous reign, if they were strong and cunning enough to hold it. In the swirl of music and candlelight, she placed her hand gently on Robert's offered arm, and together they faced the gathered crowd as king and queen, forging a new story in a realm ever ready for the next turn of fortune's wheel. Hey! A hush fell through the feasting hall as Lyanna stepped inside, candlelight dancing across the polished stone floors and gilded columns. The lamps were lit in every corner, saturating the air with a warm glow that set the gold and silver tableware aflame with flickers of reflected light. A low melody wafted from a small group of musicians situated on a raised dais toward the far side of the chamber. Harp strings, a woodwind's lilting call, the gentle strum of a lute. Laughter rose above the music now and again, pockets of conversation drifting around long trestle tables, laid with fresh linens, pitchers of wine, roast boar, and platters of colorful fruit. Robert glanced up from where he sat at the high table and caught sight of her instantly. His grin reached across the space between them, beckoning. She offered a slight nod and threaded her way around guests who paused their talk to bow or curtsy. Each one wore an expression that lingered somewhere between curiosity and measured respect. She could tell which among them had known her only by rumor. They were the ones who stared too long, as though they expected the half-wild Stark girl of stories to bolt at any moment. Others greeted her with bright courtesy, murmuring well wishes for the new reign. When she reached Robert, he stood with surprising swiftness for a man of his size. All boisterous cheer. "My queen," he said, raising his cup to her. She sat beside him, letting a servant push in her chair. Before her stretched a table laden with succulent dishes. The aroma of spiced pork mingled with the tartness of lemon cakes, the subtle sweetness of honeyed wine. She had never quite grown accustomed to the southern style of feasting. So many choices, so many exotic flavors. Yet, in their variety, she found a certain fascination. It was a vivid contrast to the simpler meals of the north, where a good roast and root vegetables were the staples through harsh winters. Ned sat on Robert's other side, his expression dutifully polite. He caught Lyanna's eye and gave her a small, reassuring smile. "You came just in time." Robert was about to propose a toast to the Queen's swordsmanship. She felt a flare of heat on her cheeks. "I hope he spares the details of how thoroughly I battered him." She let the corner of her mouth quirk up, meeting Robert's gaze. He laughed heartily. "Details are the best part. I'd have them sing songs about it if I could. Your skill only magnifies my own prowess. What man wants a meek wife who can't keep pace?" At that, a few near enough to hear chuckled politely. Lyanna inclined her head, aware of the way eyes tracked their every movement. She reached for her goblet of wine, sipped, and tasted the heady spice that southern vineyards produced. It filled her mouth with warmth. Across from her, the seats were occupied by a mix of minor lords, courtiers, and knights. She noticed the bannerless cloaks of hedge knights who had been invited to feast in the king's hall, likely for having performed some deed or out of courtesy to their newly minted titles. Beyond them, she caught glimpses of bold colors. The green and gold of House Tyrell on a visiting retainer's surcoat, the black and gold of Stormland knights, even the sun and spear crest of Doran's delegates. The realm was slowly reknitting itself, binding old wounds, though not without lingering scars. She smiled graciously at a knight who was introduced as Sir Lucant of Griffin's Roost. He bowed over her hand, praising her for breathing new life into the court. She answered with a polite demurral, still growing accustomed to the attentions that came with her position. A steward offered her a dish of braised quail, and she politely refused, having filled her plate already with enough variety. A slice of roast duck, a spoonful of stewed apples, and a small wedge of cheese from the Vale. Across the table, a well-dressed woman wearing a half-moon brooch introduced herself as Lady Sorrel, a cousin to House Lannister. She was all golden ringlets and bright, assessing eyes. "Your Grace," the lady said, voice silken, "it is a pleasure to witness this new dawn for the realm. I hope Casterly Rock and King's Landing will grow closer under your shared rule." Lyanna gave a measured smile. "We look forward to strengthening ties with all the great houses," she said diplomatically. She could almost sense Robert's faint shift beside her at the mention of Lannisters, though he remained outwardly genial. The tension between him and Tywin Lannister was well known by now, but the lady across from them showed no sign of discomfort. Robert reached for his cup. "Then let's drink to forging ties," he declared. "To forging a realm of prosperity, and not just talk of forging, mind you. We'll have a real iron bond among these lords and ladies, so that no Targaryen specter or any other phantom can threaten our peace again." A few hearty voices echoed, "Hear, hear," and goblets rose in toast. Lyanna lifted her own, meeting her husband's eyes over the rim. The fervor in his gaze stirred something within her, a subtle reminder that Robert, for all his boisterous camaraderie, could be deeply earnest about preserving the throne he had taken by force. No matter the tension with old alliances, he was determined to keep his crown firm upon his head. As the feast progressed, plates were swapped out, servers whisking away half-eaten courses to bring new ones. Minstrels roved closer to the dais now, playing a sprightly tune. Someone proposed a dance. Robert, never one to resist a display if it suited his mood, shot Lyanna a challenging grin. "Shall we?" he asked, pushing back his chair. She hesitated, glancing at Ned, who had the ghost of a smile playing on his lips. She seldom danced in the southern style, but if Robert wanted to put on a show of unity, she would oblige. The onlookers watched curiously as she rose and placed her hand in his. Music swelled from the fiddles and lutes, and the floor cleared. In her father's hall at Winterfell, dancing had been simpler, more akin to stepping in circles around a large fire. Here, the southern court dances included lively steps and swirling turns. She was grateful for the small instruction Ned's wife, Caitlin, had once given her during an extended visit. Though a bit awkward at first, she followed Robert's lead. He held her firmly, guiding her through each step with surprising grace for such a broad-shouldered man. She felt the swirl of skirts around her ankles, the swirl of the hall's attention upon them. At times her gaze lifted to see watchers lining the edges of the dance floor. The ladies with bright lips turned up in amusement or envy, the men exchanging murmured remarks. She caught glimpses of Eddard's approving nod, the faint smirk of a Stormlands knight, the politely blank expression of a Tyrell retainer. But for the length of the dance, she let herself focus on the music. The harpist plucked a lively melody, while the drummer offered a beat that quickened the pulse. As the dance finished, Robert swept her into a final turn. The hall broke into applause. She stepped back, breathing a little heavily, a rush of warmth flooding her face. Robert raised her hand as if in triumph, then led her back toward the high table, bantering with a few lords along the way. Time moved slowly in that bright, music-filled hall, each moment lengthened by the swirl of color, the glimmer of candlelight, the bursts of laughter. More courses arrived, honey cakes dusted with chopped nuts, bowls of spiced pears, and even a grand lemon tart shaped like a stag's head. Robert, cheerful from the wine and the applause, boasted he could eat a whole leg of boar by himself if they'd let him, prompting a round of mirth from the nearby guests. Lyanna partook in measured bites, keeping her composure. She felt a certain restlessness beneath her polished manners. The day's events, the dawn court session, the small council meeting, the sparring in the yard lingered in her thoughts. She recalled the conversation about the exiled Targaryens, wondering if they truly posed any threat. So much of the realm's future seemed uncertain, despite the confident veneer these southern festivities tried to project. Eventually, the feast wound down to quiet her murmurs, though it did not truly end. Some lords and ladies drifted to the side to play at dice or whisper negotiations. Others stood in clusters, finishing cups of mulled wine or mead, sharing the day's gossip. The music shifted to a softer strain. Lyanna noticed that Ned had stepped away, presumably to speak with a few northern bannermen who were in attendance. She caught a glimpse of his somber face and profile as he conversed with Lord Wyman Manderley's envoy, who wore a cerulean cloak pinned with silver. Robert leaned in, his breath warming her ear. "Come," he said quietly. "Let's take some air." The hall's stifling, even with the music. She nodded, eager for a moment away from so many watching eyes. He stood and offered his arm, leading her past a row of tall windows. A pair of gold cloaks at the main doors hurried to open them for the king and queen. The night air drifted in coolly, tinted with the salt of the sea. Beyond the torchlit courtyard lay the open sky, dotted with stars. They strolled across the courtyard, leaving behind the noise and flickering torchlight of the feast. A few guards bowed, then held still as statues while Robert guided Lyanna along a paved path that wound through a small orchard behind the Red Keep. Here, the branches of orange trees and twisted olives provided a measure of privacy. The rustling of leaves in the gentle breeze replaced the clangor of laughter. She looked up, noting how the moonlight silvered Robert's dark hair. He exhaled, the tension in his broad shoulders easing. His wine goblet was still in hand, and she teased him gently. "You can't let go of it for even a moment." He snorted, taking a long draught. "It's good Arbor vintage. I'd be a fool to let it go to waste. But in truth, yes, I needed a break from all that. Kingship is a damned heavy weight." She paused near the trunk of a gnarled orange tree, resting a hand on its bark. "Heavier than a warhammer?" He chuckled, the sound a low rumble in his chest. "1,000 times heavier, in ways you can't even imagine. Though you feel it too, I'm sure. You see how every eye follows us, how each small gesture gets twisted into rumor." She met his gaze. In the moonlight, his eyes appeared almost charcoal blue, an intensity tempered by vulnerability she rarely saw. "We can't run from it," she said. "We can only face it. Together, if we're lucky." He reached out, letting his free hand drift to her cheek. His palm was calloused, warm, the strength in it undeniable. She stood very still, as he brushed his thumb lightly along her jawline. "I wish we'd had time before all of the trouble," he murmured. "Time to get to know each other properly, without war, without illusions." She swallowed, uncertain how to answer, since part of her still wrestled with ghosts of the past. Rhaegar's memory flickered at the edges of her mind. The sorrow of it dulled, but not forgotten. Yet here and now, Robert was as real as the beating of her own heart. She placed her hand over his, feeling the roughness of his knuckles. "We have that time now," she said softly. He exhaled, leaning in so that she could smell the wine and salt in his breath. For a moment, she thought he might kiss her in the orchard's moonlit hush. But footsteps crunched along the path, and a respectful voice called, "Your Grace?" Robert turned with visible annoyance, lowering his hand. A young member of the King's Guard, Sir Barristan Selmy, stepped into the orchard's clearing with a bow. Lyanna's tension eased at the sight of him. She respected Sir Barristan, whose calm dignity set him apart from some of the other knights. "Forgive the interruption," Sir Barristan said gravely, silver hair catching the moonlight. "Lord Varys arrived in the feast hall, and seeks a word. He says it's about a messenger from the Stormlands." Robert muttered a curse under his breath. A messenger at this hour? 7 hells. The man's got a sense of timing. Lyanna held back a sigh. Duty never truly slept, she realized. She could see in Robert's face the frustration at having this moment snatched away. But she also saw the acceptance that they could not ignore important tidings. So they left the orchard, following Sir Barristan Todd. The guard flanked them with measured steps, torches illuminating the path back to the Red Keep's interior. Lyanna felt the faint chill of the night wind slip away as they passed under an archway into the keep's corridors. She glimpsed more courtiers still wandering about, their voices low in the aftermath of the feast. They reached a small side chamber off the great feasting hall. The door was half open, golden lamplight spilling across the threshold. Inside waited Varys, clad in his customary flowing robes of pale lavender, hands folded. He bowed deeply to them both. "Your Graces," he said in that soft, careful voice. "I beg pardon for disturbing you, but this seemed most urgent." Robert set his goblet on a nearby table, the shift in his demeanor palpable. He became the king again, no longer the man who had teased and laughed in the orchard. "Speak then. Which messenger and from whom?" Varys inclined his head. "A courier arrived not long ago from Storm's End. He claims Lord Courtney Penrose has concerns about certain pirates raiding along the coast. Their attacks have grown bolder, targeting supply ships meant for King's Landing. The losses are not catastrophic yet, but they are mounting." Never said in. Robert's mouth tightened. Pirates could be cell sails from the Free Cities, or perhaps remnants of Targaryen loyalists. Either way, they're crossing the line if they hamper shipping routes. Did the courier bring specific details? Varys gestured to a scroll on the table. "He did, Your Grace. Lord Penrose requests either additional ships or men to patrol the coastline. He warns that the port near Evenfall Hall might be the next target." Lyanna stepped closer to read the scrawled letter. The lines described a series of swift attacks, nighttime ambushes on lightly guarded vessels, kidnappings of deckhands, cargo stolen before the ships were set ablaze. Gruesome stuff, but hardly unusual in such uncertain times. Yet, if these raids spread, they could disrupt a vital supply chain for King's Landing, which was still rebuilding after the war. Robert paced the length of the room, tension emanating from him. Damned pirates. I should have expected as much. The seas always grow bold in times of transition. All right, we'll send word to my brother Stannis. He has the best sense for dealing with naval threats. Let him assemble a small fleet, or coordinate with Lord Penrose. If it's a real threat, we'll squash it." "No. Varys bowed. "Very good, Your Grace. Shall I have a scribe draft a royal order?" Robert nodded, passing a hand over his beard. "Yes. Make sure Stannis receives it at Dragonstone within the week. I want swift action on this." Varys offered a faint smile, then turned his gaze to Lyanna. "And if I may be so bold, Your Grace, I suggest letting word spread that the crown is not to be trifled with at sea. A little show of strength goes a long way in discouraging other would-be raiders." She regarded him calmly. "I'll ensure the court's notice makes that clear," she said. "We can't appear weak." A polite bow, and Varys withdrew, leaving them alone in the chamber, save for Sir Barristan, who stood discreetly by the door. Robert exhaled slowly, leaning against the table and bracing his hands on its edge. For a moment, Lyanna saw the tension coiled in him. "Every day," he said in a low voice, "it feels like some new crisis leaps out of the shadows. I didn't realize kingship would be so constant." She stepped closer. "I don't think your forerunners found it any easier," she said gently. "Mad king or not, the realm has always had troubles. You're just the first to face them after a war that uprooted everything. It may be harder now, but in time, it will settle." He closed his eyes, inhaling. "Yes, well, we'll see. At least we can still share the good arbor wine." He reached for his abandoned goblet, but found it empty. With a rueful chuckle, he set it aside. The flicker of candlelight caught in his eyes. "We should return to the hall. It won't do for both king and queen to vanish too long. Let's see if there's anything left worth eating, or if the guests have devoured it all." They made their way back to the feast, though it had dwindled to a subdued gathering. A handful of guests still chatted near the dais, while others drifted out in small groups, satiated by the lavish courses. The musicians had stopped playing, their instruments resting as they partook in leftovers at the servants' tables. Ned was there, patiently awaiting their return. Lyanna noticed the relief in his eyes when he saw that both she and Robert were well. He inclined his head. "I trust all is well." Robert only grunted in response. "Pirates. Nothing we can't handle. But I'll see to it in the morning with the council. Right now, I want to enjoy what's left of the night." Ned's gaze flicked to Lyanna, and she offered a small, private shrug. She understood Robert's frustration. A constant barrage of problems wore even the strongest warrior down. Ned murmured something about ensuring the scribes were prepared to draft the necessary royal orders. Then he excused himself to deal with the last departing lords. Robert looked around the now half-empty hall, a faint frown on his lips. The remains of the feast were scattered across the tables, the once grand boar carcass reduced to scraps, the lemon tart shaped like a stag mostly devoured. Servants scurried about with cloths and trays to clear the mess. Lyanna touched Robert's arm gently. "The hour grows late. Perhaps we should retire. The day has been long." Ned himself. He rubbed the back of his neck, nodding. You're right." His voice softened. "We should rest. There will be another day of duties soon enough." They left the feasting hall together, a pair of Kingsguard shadowing them. The corridors of the Red Keep were quieter now, with only the soft footsteps of servants finishing their nightly routines. Torches cast dancing shadows on the walls, and every so often a night breeze found its way through narrow windows, stirring the banners that hung in the passageways. Stags replaced dragons in most places now, though a few old sigils still lingered, awaiting removal. At length, they reached the royal apartments. The guards took positions outside the doors, while inside, the faint glow of lamp oil lit the antechamber. Robert paused near the threshold that separated his chambers from hers, turning to look at her in that hush. For a beat, neither of them spoke. She felt the day's fatigue settling in her limbs, yet she also felt an undercurrent of energy in the air between them. He broke the silence, voice low. "Would you care for a cup of wine before bed? Or shall I let you rest, my queen?" "Delphiru." She hesitated, recalling the moment in the orchard when they'd come so close to something honest. The memory still quickened her pulse. Maybe it was time to bridge the distance they often kept. "A small cup," she said quietly, "would be fine." He inclined his head, opening the door to his chamber. Inside, it was a spacious room with a high ceiling supported by carved beams. Thick drapes hung around a large bed, and the walls were hung with richly colored tapestries depicting hunts and battles. A wide table near the hearth held a decanter of dark wine and a few goblets, while a fire crackled, lending the room warmth that stood in pleasant contrast to the corridor's chill. She stepped in, glancing around. Despite its grandeur, she recognized a certain simplicity in how Robert lived. He had trophies of war. A battered helm, a dented shield, stacked in one corner, not carefully arranged but placed without fuss. A pair of hunting spears leaned against the far wall. A half-eaten loaf of bread and some cheese lay on a plate by the fire. remnants of a snack he'd likely taken earlier. He poured 2 cups of wine, offering one to her. She cradled it, letting the heat of the cup warm her palms. He took a seat on a nearby bench, a pensive look settling over his features. She joined him, the silence pressing but not entirely uncomfortable. At last he spoke. "You were right earlier, you know. We do have time now to learn who we are beyond the war, beyond the rebels and the king we fought against. Perhaps we can truly rule together, as a real partnership, not merely a marriage of convenience." She studied his face in the flickering light. "We have no choice but to try," she said softly. "We share responsibility to the realm, and to each other. Our fates are bound." He sipped his wine, nodding. "I never wanted you just because your father pledged you to me. I thought you were remarkable, strong, and I wanted a love that matched that fire. But the war changed us both." He set his cup down, running a hand over his beard. She felt a stirring of something like sympathy, or maybe empathy, for this man who had stormed castles and toppled a dynasty, and now found himself grappling with a role he hadn't realized would demand more than brute strength. She gently touched his arm. "I'm not who I was before," she confessed, her voice almost a whisper. "I saw and felt things I never expected, and some illusions I clung to turned to ash in my hands. But I'm alive, you're alive, and the realm has a chance at peace." He turned his hand to capture hers, threading their fingers together. It felt oddly intimate, more so than the public gestures they shared. Her heart beat a little faster. She could see in his eyes a longing to bridge the gap of all that had happened. The fire crackled, throwing sparks into the air. Shadows played across the tapestries, where a huntsman loomed over a stag with a spear. She thought of the endless days ahead, council sessions, negotiations, decisions about harvests and taxes. But also the moments like this, where they sat quietly, with only the murmur of flames between them, trying to build something meaningful out of the wreckage. He lifted her hand to his lips, brushing a soft kiss across her knuckles. "Thank you for standing by me," he said. "Truly." She closed her eyes, letting herself savor the warmth of his gesture. "I'll always stand by what is right for the realm," she answered, not quite letting herself say the words that might imply deeper affection. But for tonight, her presence here, her hand in his, might speak enough. They stayed there together until her eyelids grew heavy. Finally, she withdrew her hand gently. He understood. Rising, he walked her to the door that adjoined their chambers, pressing a light hand to her back as though reluctant to let her go. She hovered a moment in the doorway, uncertain whether to speak again. He looked at her as if waiting for some sign. She offered a faint, reassuring smile before stepping into her own room. Inside, she found a single lamp still burning, and her linens turned down by the maids. She slipped off her gown, feeling the cool air against her arms. A subtle fragrance of lavender and mint drifted from the fresh bedding. As she settled beneath the covers, the events of the day reeled through her mind. The uneasy talk of Targaryen loyalists, the lingering tension with House Lannister, the threat of pirates, the swirl of southern dances, the orchard's hush, and Robert's quiet yearning. All of it merged into one tapestry that was her life now. She thought of Winterfell as she drifted off to sleep, pitch stark beauty, the chill wind across snow-laden fields, the howling of wolves echoing through the ancient halls. Part of her would always be that girl from the north, wild at heart, brimming with restless energy. She wondered if King's Landing would ever feel like home. Perhaps, in time, she would carve out her own sense of belonging here, among the swirling politics and perfumed court. Morning brought the hazy light of a sky half obscured by clouds. A knock came at her door, and one of her ladies-in-waiting, a mild-tempered girl from the Vale named Karis, entered to draw back the curtains. Lyanna stretched, feeling the new day's responsibilities creeping in before her feet even touched the floor. Karis helped her dress in a gown of pale gray silk, clasped at the waist with a belt of hammered silver shaped like running wolves. A gift from Ned. There would be no public festivities that morning. Only a series of tasks she knew demanded attention. Robert would confer with the council about the pirates, and possibly about summoning Tywin Lannister soon. She sighed inwardly, steeling herself. After breaking her fast on bread, boiled eggs and a cup of tea, she headed to a smaller audience chamber where she sometimes met petitioners on her own. It was a practice she and Ned had instituted, allowing small folk or lesser lords, especially women, to bring their grievances or requests to the Queen directly. It was in part a show of goodwill, demonstrating that this new regime listened to more than just the High Lords. She found 3 petitioners waiting under the watchful eye of a pair of guards. The chamber was modest, though still grand by the standards of many. A few tapestries of the Baratheon stag hung near the walls, and a broad, arched window gave a view of the courtyard. A simple wooden seat, not nearly as intimidating as the Iron Throne, served as her place for hearing appeals. She greeted the trio, a merchant's wife seeking redress for her husband's wrongful imprisonment, a young knight from the Riverlands requesting a letter of endorsement to serve in the city watch, and a timid-looking woman who bore scars on her face and told a harrowing tale of bandits on the Rosby Road. Lyanna listened carefully to each, conscious of how her father had always given time to those who traveled great distances to plead their case. To the merchant's wife, she promised to speak with Ned and ensure the man's case was heard swiftly by a magistrate. "If your husband has been wrongly accused," Lyanna said, "we'll see him freed. If he is guilty, the punishment must fit the crime. But no one shall languish in a cell without a proper hearing." The woman bowed, tears shining in her eyes, and thanked the Queen profusely. The young knight, all of 19 years with hope in his eyes, explained that he had served House Tully's bannermen but lost much of his land and inheritance during the war. He wished to start anew in King's Landing. Lyanna regarded him a moment, noticing how his armor was meticulously polished though cheaply made. Perhaps he was earnest enough, though the City Watch was no small matter. "I'll speak to the Lord Commander of the City Watch," she said. "If they have need, an endorsement could be arranged. But be warned, King's Landing is not a gentle place." He bowed vigorously, a rush of gratitude coloring his face, and she wondered if he knew what challenges truly lay ahead. Then the woman with scars told her story in halting words, describing a group of brigands who waylaid travelers and demanded coin outside the city. She had been attacked, her goods stolen, and her traveling companion left for dead. Lyanna felt a flare of anger. Even with a new king, pockets of lawlessness festered. The war had unsettled many areas. She promised the woman that the crown would dispatch men to ensure the road was patrolled. "Give the master at arms your full account," she said, "so we know where to find these outlaws. Justice will be done." "Man!" The woman's gratitude shimmered in her moist eyes, and Lyanna felt a small pang of resolve. If she could do nothing else, she could at least ensure that people like her did not vanish into the cracks of a broken system. By midday, the petitions were done. She rose from her seat and stretched, a mild ache in her shoulders reminding her how tense she had been. Leaving the chamber, she found Ned waiting in the corridor. They walked together, passing under arches, and through a courtyard where several squires practiced sword forms under the watchful gaze of an older knight. She could hear the ring of steel echo against the walls. Ned glanced at his sister. "How were the morning petitions?" She explained briefly, and he nodded in approval. "You're doing well by them, Lyanna. Father would have been proud." His mention of their father tugged at her heart. She missed him deeply, the stoic but fair Lord Rickard Stark. She felt a moment of grief for all the Starks they had lost. Her brother Brandon, her father, and the illusions of a simpler time. Yet, she was grateful to still have Ned by her side. They entered a smaller courtyard, one used for training archery. Guards parted to let them through. Sunlight beamed down, casting shadows along the stone. She turned to Ned, who looked uncharacteristically grim. "There's another matter," he said, voice lowered. "I've had a raven from the Eyrie. John Arryn writes that some of the Vale Lords are restless. They resent the new taxes, though they know it's needed to rebuild. They fear will drain their coffers to repay war debts." She pressed her lips together. "We can't dismiss their concerns. The Vale was loyal to Robert from the start. It wouldn't do to alienate them now." Ned nodded. I agree. I'll raise it in the council session. Perhaps we can stagger the taxes or find some compromise. John himself seems open to the discussion. "Miss-o, let me know if I can help," she said. "Perhaps I could speak with some of the Vale ladies, approach it from another angle." He gave her a small, grateful smile. "You're learning fast. I thought you'd hate all this politicking." She allowed herself a slight shrug. "I'd rather be writing or practicing my sword work. But if I ignore the realm's troubles, what good am I as queen?" He squeezed her arm. "Your sense of duty does father honor." A loud call from the corner of the yard drew their attention. They turned to see Robert striding in with a pair of knights, deep in conversation. The king waved when he spotted them, changing course to approach. "Ned Lyanna," he said. "I've spoken with Stannis via Raven. He's already begun preparing ships at Dragonstone to deal with these pirates." "Good news for once." Ned inclined his head. "That was quick action." Robert grinned, though there was an edge of seriousness behind it. "My brother's a man of duty if nothing else. In the meantime, we'll bolster the garrisons near the coast. We can't let them cripple our trade." "Scow. And..." Lyanna shifted her weight. "Let me know if there's anything I can do. Perhaps speak with merchants about adjusting routes or encouraging them to pool resources for hired escorts." Robert nodded approvingly. "Yes, do that. They'll listen to you, especially those who aren't sure if they trust the new king's men yet. And..." He hesitated, glancing at Ned. "We've word Tywin Lannister will arrive sooner than expected. Perhaps by the end of the week." "Memdara." Ned's features hardened slightly, but he kept his tone even. "That's quick. He must have already been on the road." Robert frowned. "You know Tywin. He waits for no man, and he wants to ensure he appears indispensable. We'll have to grant him an audience. Hell, bring half his family, no doubt." Lyanna could sense the tension rolling off Robert. The Lannisters had declared fealty to him after the sack of King's Landing. But that violent act still lingered in memory. An unsavory catalyst that cemented the Targaryen downfall. Tywin Lannister was too powerful to be disregarded. Yet Robert likely still harbored resentment for the brutality and opportunism that had marked Tywin's move. She touched Robert's arm lightly. "We'll handle it. We've weathered bigger threats. A diplomatic conversation, a feast or two, and he'll be on his way." Robert let out a short laugh. "And we'll give him enough courtesy to keep that gold flowing toward the crown. Yes, we'll manage." He seemed to notice for the first time the group of squires practicing archery on the far side of the yard. He cast them an assessing glance. "Good," he muttered. "The next generation of knights needs a strong arm and a strong heart. Gods know we need something besides the politics of old men." The three of them watched as one squire loosed an arrow that thudded off the target's edge. Another squire corrected him, re-knocking his arrow carefully. The moment gave Lyanna a pang of nostalgia for Winterfell's training yard, where she'd spent many an afternoon teasing her brothers or practicing her own aim when father wasn't watching too closely. At length, Ned excused himself, citing the need to prepare for the next council session. Robert lingered, arms folded, studying the archers. Lyanna quietly stood by him, aware that the warmth of the midday sun contrasted the weight of their many concerns. He turned to her with a softer expression. "You remind me a bit of Ned," he said. "Calmer in some ways than me, though I doubt you see it that way. But you have a steadiness that helps me keep my feet on the ground, especially when I'd rather swing a hammer than sign a parchment." She arched a brow, a faint smile on her lips. "I never thought I'd be called calm. When I was a girl, I was known for my spirit and my impulsive nature." "That are no more." He shrugged, smiling. "Time changes us. And maybe it's that spirit that spurs me on. I'm grateful for it, truly." She lowered her gaze, almost shy under his praise, then lifted her eyes again to meet his. "We'll make the best of what we have," she said. "Let the realm see that Baratheon and Stark are as united as they ever were in battle." His grin widened. "Aye, that they will, she-wolf." They strolled across the courtyard, continuing their quiet conversation about the pressing matters that faced them. From the ramparts overhead, the wind carried the tang of the sea, reminding her that King's Landing, for all its southern flamboyance, stood on a precarious edge between land and water. The city bustled beneath them, full of common folk laboring in the markets, forging deals in the taverns, carrying their hopes and fears as the realm rebuilt. She thought again of the petitioners she had met that morning. Their voices echoed in her mind, urging her forward. In the days that followed, life at the Red Keep proved both routine and rife with new tensions. Meetings with minor lords were coupled with hush-hush discussions behind closed doors about any sign of Targaryen sympathizers. Stannis letters arrived daily, detailing progress in hunting the pirates. The City Watch reported petty crimes and the occasional rowdy outburst among knights who had drunk too much at local taverns. Gossip circulated regarding the approach of Tywin Lannister. Some rumored he would demand a match between one of his kin and a High Lord's daughter to strengthen ties. Others whispered that he might be coming to push for more power on the council. Amid these undercurrents, Lyanna clung to small moments of solace. A morning ride in the royal stables, a stolen hour training with her sword, a quiet dinner with Ned in a hand solar where they reminisced about the North. She and Robert sometimes shared those private cups of wine in the evenings, talking of strategies to unify the realm or occasionally slipping into a comfortable silence that required no words. She felt the beginnings of a partnership forming, though something inside her remained watchful, unwilling to let go of caution entirely. Then, late one afternoon, as the sun slanted golden across the city's rooftops, a herald sounded the arrival of House Lannister in the capital. A column of riders wound their way through the gate, the crimson and gold banners of the Lion fluttering in the breeze. The courtyard bustled as servants rushed to prepare welcome. Robert, clad in a black tunic trimmed with gold stags, stood with Lyanna at the top of the Red Keep's grand steps, Ned beside them. Through the wide gates, they saw the imposing figure of Tywin Lannister at the head of the party. His blonde hair had gone to silver in parts, but his bearing was ramrod straight, and his green eyes burned with the intensity of a man who commanded absolute loyalty from his retinue. At his side rode a young man with the unmistakable Lannister look. Golden hair, keen gaze, wearing a confident smirk. Jaime Lannister, the Kingsguard who had slain the Mad King, now ironically bound to protect Robert's throne. He wore his white cloak but rode beside his father, an odd juxtaposition of roles. Lyanna felt a subtle shift in the atmosphere as they dismounted. Tywin stepped forward to greet Robert with a bow that was courteous but restrained. "Your Grace," he said in a measured tone. "I trust the realm prospers under your watch." Robert forced a smile, returning the courtesy. "We do our best," he said. "Welcome to King's Landing, Lord Tywin. We hope your stay will be productive." Tywin's gaze flicked briefly to Lyanna. "Your Grace," he said, bowing once more. "Your presence honors us. I look forward to speaking with you about matters that concern the entire realm." She inclined her head, summoning a polite facade. "We are glad to host you." Behind Tywin trailed a short line of Lannister bannermen and relatives. She noticed a carriage at the rear, from which emerged a slender woman in a fine gown, her hair the color of pale gold. Cersei, presumably, though Lyanna had never met her in person. Cersei was once rumored to be Rhaegar's potential bride, then rumored to be Robert's potential bride. War had changed everything. The Lannisters made a grand impression, as always, with shining plate armor and embroidered finery. They carried themselves like conquerors despite arriving as guests. Lyanna could almost taste the tension in the air, remembering that the sack of King's Landing had been their doing, or at least their order, and it had sealed the fate of the Targaryens. Now these same Lannisters were draped in gold and courtesy, stepping onto the marble steps as if they owned them. Yet that was the dance of power. Robert extended formal hospitality, and Tywin accepted it. The staff led them inside to prepared chambers, while Robert murmured aside to Ned and Lyanna that they would convene a small welcome feast that evening, on a lesser scale than the wedding celebrations, but enough to show the new queen's graciousness. Lyanna watched as Tywin strode away, posture rigid, Jaime trailing a step behind. She glanced at Robert, who exhaled and muttered, "This will be a trial, one way or another." Ned nodded gravely. "We must tread carefully." Lyanna set her jaw. "We will. The realm depends on it." The day was not yet over, and already she sensed the flurry of preparations for the evening's gathering. Servants bustled about with tapestries to decorate the hall anew, fresh garlands of flowers, newly tapped barrels of wine. The arrival of House Lannister would stir the city's gossip. Some might say the king was forging a deeper alliance. Others might fear he was bending to Tywin's will. She knew appearances mattered, but the truth was more complicated. They needed the Lannisters' gold to help the realm recover, but Robert would not be beholden. She glanced at the darkening sky. A faint line of clouds drifted in, tinted with pink by the setting sun. She inhaled, steeling herself for another evening of pageantry, this time with a lion in their midst. She hoped it would not turn bloody or fractious. War was done, but peace required as much cunning and vigilance as any battlefield. Drawing her cloak around her shoulders, she walked back inside to make ready for the night's events, her heart brimming with a cautious determination. She was Lyanna Stark, now Queen Lyanna Baratheon, and she would not let the realm down. The steps ahead would be delicate, but she had chosen to walk them, and walk them she would, never forgetting the northern wind that still howled in her veins. Anuni. The corridors bustled with activity and preparation for the evening meal. Word had spread that Lord Tywin Lannister had arrived at King's Landing sooner than expected, and servants rushed to transform the Great Hall into a setting worthy of receiving the formidable Lord of the West. Though they had feasted not long ago, the castle staff toiled with renewed determination, changing table linens, lighting rows of candles, and arranging fresh garlands of flowers to drape over pillars and railings. Outside, the last traces of daylight melted into dusk, coloring the sky with pale oranges and dusky purples that faded over the black water. Lyanna walked through the winding corridors at a measured pace, her gown of pale gray silk trailing behind her. She noted how many of those she passed looked up with a certain charged curiosity on their faces. House Lannister's presence inevitably stirred rumors, especially with Tywin himself leading the group. Everyone wanted to know what the old lion intended, and how the royal couple would receive him. Even the usual hush of servants was broken by whispers, brief flickers of gossip that died the moment they saw their queen approaching. She reached the chamber that had been designated for a few final touches to her attire. Within, her lady-in-waiting Caris fussed over a silver clasp in the shape of a direwolf to pin at Lyanna's left shoulder. Caris handled the delicate clasp with care, ensuring it fastened properly to hold the light cloak of charcoal wool in place. Lyanna's dark hair fell loose down her back, brushed until it gleamed, and around her neck she wore a thin chain of gold with a small carved stag. She had begun mixing tokens of her northern heritage with those of her new house. The realm expected its queen to manifest both sides of her lineage. Caris stepped back, assessing the overall effect. "Your Grace, you look resplendent." None could doubt the North stands with a crown. Lyanna managed a modest smile. "Thank you. It's not always an easy balance." Caris bowed. "I believe you strike it well, Your Grace." "Shall I call the guards to escort you to the Great Hall?" Lyanna nodded. "Yes, please. We mustn't keep our guests waiting." Moments later, 2 gold-cloaked guards arrived at the door, each bowing before they fell into step beside her. The walk to the Great Hall felt strangely long, every footstep echoing against the polished stone. With each turn in the corridor, she caught glimpses of flickering torches through arched windows that overlooked the courtyard. Already, she could hear the low hum of many voices drifting from ahead, a sign the welcoming feast was about to begin in earnest. She stepped into the Great Hall, now dressed for a more intimate but still significant gathering. Smaller round tables had replaced the long trestle arrangement used at large feasts, scattered strategically across the chamber, each adorned with centerpieces of late summer blossoms. At the far end, the royal dais remained, set with 2 seats for the king and queen, wood richly carved and gilded, though it paled next to the Iron Throne's grim majesty. Robert was already there, talking quietly with Eddard Stark, and a few higher lords. Mace Tyrell, who was broad of girth and wore a green doublet, and Lord Redwing from the Arbor, who always smelled faintly of grapes. Lyanna's gaze flicked past them to the opposite side, where Tywin Lannister stood with Jaime by his shoulder and a scattering of Lannister bannermen in attendance. Tywin's hair was silver gold, cropped close, and his pale green eyes took in the hall with a kind of practiced reserve. Jaime was a study in handsome ease, clad in the white cloak of the Kingsguard but with gold details beneath, his entire bearing exuding confidence. Beside them a woman stood draped in crimson. Cersei Lannister, her golden hair pinned back in artful braids, framing a face that was both proud and watchful. Lyanna could feel the tension in the air as the lion and the stag prepared to share a table, the memory of the war's end and the sacking of King's Landing no doubt still resonating between them. Robert spotted Lyanna and broke off his conversation with Ned, beckoning her closer. She crossed the hall, returning polite greetings from a few lords who bowed as she passed. When she reached Robert's side, he placed a hand lightly on her arm, his grip warm and reassuring. She could sense the undercurrent of excitement running through him. For all that the king disliked politics, he relished the chance to prove his strength. "Well met, my queen," he said quietly, leaning in so that only she could hear. "We're about to begin." They turned as one to face the gathering. Robert lifted a goblet and signaled for quiet. The musicians fell silent, and the conversations around the chamber dwindled to a hush. Lyanna stood straight, meeting the gazes that flicked her way. She saw curiosity in some eyes, skepticism in others, and a hint of veiled admiration as well. Robert's voice boomed across the hall. "My lords, ladies, and honored guests, we welcome House Lannister to King's Landing. Lord Tywin has come a long way, and we would show him the courtesy and hospitality of the crown. Let us drink to continued peace and prosperity in the realm." At those words, servants moved swiftly around the tables, refilling goblets with wine. Once every guest had a full cup, Robert nodded toward them, and in near unison, they raised their drinks. Lyanna sipped from hers, the wine sweet on her tongue, the tension in the room still palpable. Tywin inclined his head in polite acknowledgement, but his face betrayed little. He lifted his own goblet, took a measured drink, then set it down. Jaime stood at his side doing the same, a faintly amused look playing over the younger man's features. Cersei lowered her lashes, taking in the surroundings with a half-smile. The meal began. The guests found their seats, and servers brought out a first course of leek soup and herb-crusted bread. Robert sat at the dais with Lyanna on his right, Ned on his left, and Tywin occupying a place of honor nearby. Jaime took a seat a few chairs down, while Cersei positioned herself next to her father. Mace Tyrell and other lords formed a loose circle of conversation, each keen to observe or join in when advantage presented itself. Lyanna forced herself to taste the soup even as she tried to gauge Tywin's mood. She saw him exchange quiet words with Cersei, who nodded once, her expression cool. Lyanna wondered briefly what Cersei thought of her own marriage to Robert. Once rumor had it, Cersei might have wed Rhaegar Targaryen or Robert himself. Now she was here as a mere observer, overshadowed by her father's imposing presence. Robert placed his spoon aside, addressing Tywin in a tone that attempted to be cordial. "How fares Casterly Rock these days? I've heard your mines continue to yield gold aplenty." Tywin responded in a measured voice. "The rock is prosperous, your grace. The yields remain steady though we invest in new ventures as well. Smithies, trade, ensuring the West remains strong." He paused, meeting Robert's gaze evenly. "We stand ready to support the crown, as always." Robert nodded, tapping his fingers against the table. "We appreciate the West's support. The realm has much rebuilding to do after the war. We've had to levy new taxes, and the people mutter about them, but better a well-defended land than chaos." Tywin inclined his head, his voice smooth. "Indeed. Stability must be maintained. That is why House Lannister stands prepared to finance certain endeavors, should the crown require it. For the right terms, of course." Lyanna could practically feel Robert bristle beside her. The king did not enjoy being reminded of debts or potential obligations, but he hid it behind a mask of hearty acceptance. She decided to interject before the tension hardened too far. "It's good to see that so many are willing to invest in the realm's future," she said. "We aim to strengthen alliances across all regions. The West, the Reach, the North. Peace among the great houses benefits everyone." Tywin's gaze flicked to her. "Wise words, your grace. Peace is indeed beneficial. Cersei leaned in, a faint smile on her lips. And House Lannister is glad to see King's Landing prosper under new leadership. My father has keen interest in the ways we might, shall we say, hasten the city's recovery. No. Lyanna offered a polite smile. We welcome any counsel. A servant arrived with the next course, roasted quail in a sweet glaze, accompanied by spiced carrots. The rich aroma momentarily diverted attention, and conversation shifted around the table. Ned took advantage of the lull to quietly mention to Lyanna that he'd had word from Stannis. The pirate problem near the Stormlands seemed to be under control, at least for now. A few ships had been captured, their crews hanged or imprisoned. She felt a flicker of relief and relayed the news to Robert, who nodded, pleased. While the others ate, Jaime turned his attention to Ned, something like mild curiosity lighting his expression. Lord Stark, how fares the North since the rebellion? Have you found it difficult to rebuild your holdings after the Targaryens' downfall? Ned's features remain neutral. Winterfell stands, Sir Jaime. The North is vast, and our people are resilient. We focus on forging bonds between our bannermen and ensuring roads remain passable. The war touched us less than some regions, though we've had our share of hardship. Jaime tilted his head. I imagine the climate alone is hardship enough. Ned did not rise to the bait in Jaime's tone, though Lyanna felt a faint flicker of annoyance. She reminded herself that Jaime was young and prone to jests, even when they bordered on disrespect. Robert, however, let out a short laugh, diffusing the tension. Hardship indeed. I once visited the North in midwinter. Even my bones felt cold. But the Starks endure. They always do. Tywin sipped his wine, his green eyes roving the table. May they endure for generations to come, he said, his tone impossible to read. And may this crown endure as well. I trust the Targaryen threat is no more than a few exiles scrabbling overseas. Robert exchanged a glance with Lyanna. She felt her heartbeat pick up slightly. Mention of the Targaryens was always a fraught topic, especially with the knowledge that a few survivors had fled to Essos. She waited to see how Robert would respond. The Targaryens are finished, Robert declared flatly. Mad King dead. Rhaegar dead. The children in exile. If they ever gather an army, it'll be no match for the Seven Kingdoms united. No sense worrying about a few dragonless whelps. Natchte. Tywin's expression remained impassive. As you say, Your Grace. Yet the conversation lingered in the air like a phantom. Lyanna remembered well how the Targaryen name once spelled grandeur and fear. Even now, across the sea, Viserys and Daenerys might be dreaming of reclaiming their birthright. But the moment passed, and the meal continued. More courses followed. Venison stew, a bright salad of local greens, then platters of cheese and fruit for those who still had appetite. The pace of conversation ebbed and flowed, talk drifting to the politics of the Reach, the unrest in certain corners of the Riverlands, and the intricacies of the Crown's finances. Lyanna listened carefully, interjecting only when it seemed helpful. She knew Tywin was assessing her, just as he assessed Robert and Ned, measuring how each might fit into his plans. Cersei contributed little beyond carefully timed smiles or bland remarks that supported her father's stance. Lyanna wondered if Cersei's role here was primarily decorative, or if the woman hid sharper ambitions behind that polished exterior. The Lannister daughter had a cool sort of beauty, and the few times their eyes met, Lyanna found it impossible to decipher what lay beneath Cersei's poised veneer. At length, the feast wound down. Servants cleared plates and replaced them with flagons of ale and wine for those who lingered. Robert signaled the musicians to play a final soft tune. Guests began rising from their seats, drifting into clusters to continue private conversations. Tywin stood, drawing the attention of several lords who quickly formed a circle around him, eager to ingratiate themselves. Robert touched Lyanna's shoulder. I need to speak with Tywin and the others about some of these financial proposals. Will you be all right? She offered a reassuring nod. Go. I'll see to our other guests. He leaned in, pressing a swift kiss to her cheek, then strode away, the gold stags on his tunic catching the lamplight. Ned quietly followed, keeping a watchful distance. Through the shifting movements of the hall, Lyanna glimpsed Tywin turning with measured deliberation to greet Robert's approach. She saw the old lion dip his head, though not too low, as if all deference was calculated. Robert grinned, but there was a tension in his jaw. Lyanna exhaled and moved away from the dais, weaving past a group of knights sharing a joke. She paused by one of the large windows that overlooked the courtyard, grateful for the wash of cooler air from outside. Much as she tried to maintain poise, the constant tension was draining. She felt the slight pinch of the cloak's clasp at her shoulder, as though it had grown heavier over the course of the evening. She turned her head at the sound of footsteps. Cersei Lannister approached, that same delicate half-smile curved on her red lips. "Your Grace," Cersei said, offering a small dip of the head that fell short of a full bow. "A pleasant meal. I trust the king was satisfied with the arrangements." Lyanna inclined her chin politely. "We did our best to make Lord Tywin welcome. I hope you found everything to your liking." Bandarawa. Cersei's gaze flicked to the side, where Robert and Tywin conferred in subdued tones. "My father is always particular. He appreciates a display of respect, and King Robert's courtesy has not gone unnoticed." Lyanna took a moment to interpret the layers of meaning in that. "We are all part of the same realm now," she said carefully. "We must show each other respect if we expect the realm to mend. The war is done." Cersei's lips curved in an expression that might have been amusement. "War may be done, but influence and power shift constantly. The Lannisters stand ready to assist this new regime, so long as we are given proper place in it. I suspect my father has many ideas on that score." "Wayne." Lyanna met Cersei's eyes. "We want to heal the kingdom. We welcome House Lannister's support." Cersei regarded her for a moment in silence. Then she inclined her head once more and withdrew, moving toward Jaime, who had stationed himself by a column. Lyanna's gaze followed her, noting the subtle way Jaime bent to whisper something in his sister's ear. Cersei listened, her expression closed, then nodded. Together, they drifted from the crowd and out the side door. Lyanna turned back to the window, letting out a slow breath. She did not fully trust Cersei or Jaime. There was an undercurrent in their manner she found unsettling. Tywin's arrival, though couched in formality, brought so many hidden agendas into the open. She resolved not to let them see any sign of uncertainty. Dismissing the swirl of uneasy thoughts for a moment, she decided to wander through the hall and speak with some of the lesser lords, ensuring that none felt neglected. House Rosby's representative was there, along with a few knights from the Stormlands who had once served under Robert's banner. Lyanna moved with quiet grace, accepting their bows and fielding their questions. She asked after local disputes, promised to pass concerns along to the hand or relevant council members, and offered smiles that sometimes felt heavier than the crown she wore on formal occasions. Near the center of the hall, she paused upon hearing a familiar voice. Lord Wyman, Manderley's man, the same envoy she had glimpsed earlier, was explaining to a few southern lords how White Harbor sought increased trade routes through the Bight. She stepped closer, greeting him warmly as a representative of the North. The envoy bowed, then delved into a polite complaint about the Crown lands imposing higher tariffs on ships sailing from White Harbor. Lyanna listened patiently, acknowledging the burden of taxes. She assured him that the realm was in the process of reviewing trade agreements to stimulate growth. He seemed mollified, though not entirely satisfied. She understood. It was rare for anyone to leave such discussions fully content. When she finally peeled away from the knot of courtiers, she realized the hall had begun to thin considerably. Candle stubs were guttering in their holders. The music had ceased, and only a handful of guests remained, speaking in low voices or enjoying a final cup of wine. Robert was nowhere in sight, presumably having gone with Tywin to a more private room for extended discussions. Ned stood by the dais, quietly conversing with Lord Redwine. But he caught Lyanna's eye, and gave a small nod that signaled all was well. She slipped from the great hall, stepping into the corridor beyond, where torches sputtered in wall sconces. The hush here was almost a relief after the swirl of conversation and tension in the hall. She inhaled, considering whether she might take a moment of solitude in the castle gardens before retiring. But footsteps sounded behind her. She turned to see Ned approaching, his expression grave. "You look tired," he said gently. Once he was close enough to speak softly. The night was long. She gave a small shrug. I'm all right. Have you any idea how Robert's talk with Tywin is proceeding? Ned shook his head. They went off with a few of the council members, Lord Baelish, Pycelle, and Varys. Likely they're hashing out coin matters. Robert wants no part of further debt, but the crown's coffers are thin. Lord Tywin will leverage that. She let out a soft sigh. We saw this coming. The war cost so much. Houses loyal to us must be repaid for their efforts, and the city repairs aren't cheap. Duh. Lord Tywin knows we need gold, and that puts him in a position of strength. Ned nodded, mouth set in a grim line. We can't afford to alienate him, but we also can't let him dictate terms. Robert has to walk a fine line, and you too. She rested a hand on Ned's forearm. We will. I just wish we could carve out real peace without so many tangles. He offered a faint, sad smile. That's the nature of kingship, sister. Father always said ruling was a heavier burden than it appeared. The war gave Robert the throne, but now he must pay its cost in compromise and caution. They stood there a moment in contemplative silence. Then, Lyanna sighed again. I think I'll go to the gardens for a moment. Let my mind settle before bed. Ned nodded. I'll escort you. They walked side by side through dimly lit corridors, passing occasional guards who straightened upon seeing the queen and the hand. A low breeze whispered through arrow slits high in the walls, bringing with it the crisp scent of night. As they descended a short flight of steps, the sounds of crickets chirping reached their ears. The castle gardens were bathed in moonlight, and torches lined the paths at intervals. Roses, night-blooming flowers, and slender trees with silvered leaves rustled in the gentle wind. Lyanna led Ned to a corner where a small marble bench rested beneath a trellis. Overhead, the stars glittered, the sky free of clouds for the moment. She sat, patting the space beside her, though Ned chose to remain standing, arms folded. In the moonlight, his features looked more severe, the lines of care etched from war and responsibility. She remembered him as a boy, shy and dutiful, and she wondered if he ever longed for simpler days just as she did. After a moment she spoke softly. Do you ever think about what life would be if none of this had happened? If I'd never been promised to Robert, if Rhaegar hadn't... She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. He gave a quiet sigh. Sometimes. But those thoughts only bring sorrow for what can't be changed. We can't go back to what was. And she looked up at him, noting the sadness in his eyes that he rarely let others see. I know. We have to move forward. Robert is not a perfect king, but he's ours, and we must guide him. Ned dipped his head in agreement. He's a good man at heart, perhaps raw in matters of governance, but he cares. And with you beside him, the realm stands a better chance. The Lord see that you temper his impulses. Even Tywin, I suspect, is taking measure of your influence. She pressed her lips together. Let Tywin look. I'll do what I must for the realm. They lingered in companionable silence, the night air cool on their faces, the faint chorus of insects lulling them. At length, Ned offered his arm. It's late. You should rest. Tomorrow will bring new demands. She rose, taking his arm. They walked back into the Red Keep, climbing the steps to the residential corridors. The occasional torch burned low, casting flickering shadows on the walls. Finally, they reached the hall where their chambers lay. Ned bowed, bidding her good night, and continued on to his own quarters. 2 Kingsguards stood guard outside Lyanna's room, their white cloaks stark in the torchlight. They bowed as she approached, stepping aside to let her enter. Inside, a single lamp burned on the polished table near the fireplace, and a window stood open, revealing a slice of star-filled sky. She unclasped the wolf brooch at her shoulder, setting it on the table, then slid out of her cloak. Her limbs felt heavy, fatigue seeping in now that the night's exertions were done. She noticed a letter on the table near the lamp, sealed with wax bearing the sigil of House Stark, likely a message from Winterfell or from one of her kin in the north. She cracked the seal carefully. It was a short note from Benjen, her younger brother, who now served at the wall. He wrote to congratulate her on the coronation and wedding, belatedly perhaps. Ravens from the wall could be delayed by weather. He hinted at rumors of wildling movements beyond the wall, though nothing dire, and concluded by urging her to keep vigilant in her new role. She sighed, folding the parchment. Even at the wall, her brother sensed the world's unrest. Setting the letter aside, she began to undo the laces of her gown. The bed beckoned, but her mind still buzzed. She washed her face with cool water from a basin, then took a moment to gaze at her reflection in the small mirror. The queen gazing back was not the impetuous girl who once galloped through Winterfell's fields. This woman's eyes held knowledge of war, loss, and the uneasy peace that followed. Yet, she stood firm. She was determined not to falter. A gentle knock sounded at the door connecting her room to Robert's chambers. She hesitated, then called, "Yes?" The door opened, and Robert stepped in, clad in a loose linen shirt and breeches. His expression was thoughtful, subdued compared to his usual boisterous manner. He closed the door behind him, leaning against it for a moment. "I was just finishing the discussion with Tywin," he said quietly. "He's pressing for lower interest on any loans, demanding privileges for Lannister merchants in the capital. Some other nonsense. I told him would consider it but wouldn't be bullied." Lyanna nodded, turning to face him. "Is he still here?" "He took his leave for the night, with a few pointed comments about resuming talks tomorrow. The man's relentless, but I expected no less. For all that I can't abide his arrogance, I need that gold." She moved closer, resting a hand on the edge of a small writing desk. "We'll manage," she said. "We have to. Stannis is handling the pirates. We're mending roads. The small folk are starting to trust us. If Tywin finances more of the city's rebuilding, we can ensure the capital is secure." Robert gave a low grunt. "It just feels like we traded one enemy for another. Though not with swords and flames this time. The war was simpler, you know. You see a foe, you swing, you break them, you move on. This," he gestured around, as if indicating the intangible complexities of rule. "It's endless talk, endless compromise." She offered him a small, understanding smile. "But this keeps the realm together, and it keeps thousands from dying in battles. Isn't that worth the trouble?" He blew out a breath, then nodded. "Hey, you were right. I'd rather fight 1,000 battles than see another civil war, though. We'll do what we must to keep the peace." "Nay." Silence stretched between them. She noticed his eyes flick to her half-laced gown, then back to her face. There was a hesitation in him, as if he did not want to intrude further on her rest. But she wasn't certain if she wanted him to leave. They shared a marriage that was still forging its shape. A large part of her yearned for more than political unity, for an actual bond. She crossed the space between them, placing a hand on his chest. She felt the solid thud of his heartbeat beneath her palm. "I'm proud of what you did tonight," she said softly. "You held your temper, you showed courtesy. That's not always easy for you." He gave a rueful smile, covering her hand with his. "I suppose not. But you help me, you know. Knowing you're there beside me, it makes me want to do better. I never realized how much a king might rely on his queen until I had you." A subtle warmth coursed through her at his admission. She tilted her head up, meeting his gaze in the low lamplight. For a moment, she thought of how she had once imagined a grand romance, something that transcended duty, that soared on the wings of song and story. But reality was different. Maybe it wasn't about grand gestures. Maybe it was about these quieter moments of shared purpose, genuine respect, and slowly kindling affection. Robert leaned down, brushing his lips against her forehead in a gentle kiss. She closed her eyes, letting the moment settle around them like a soft cloak. The hush of the night, the distant sound of the sea, the flicker of lamplight on the walls. Everything stilled, and she felt Robert's breath against her hair. He pulled back, a touch of hesitation in his eyes. "I'll let you rest if you want," she considered, then slowly shook her head. "Stay," she whispered. "At least for a while. We've enough trouble waiting for us come morning." He nodded, and together they drifted toward the fire, which glowed faintly in the hearth. She found a seat on a low sofa, Robert lowering himself beside her. They talked in hushed voices of small details. How the city's gates needed reinforcing. How the Master of Laws had a plan to curb theft in the markets. How best to approach Tywin again on the morrow. Yet under the practical words ran an undercurrent of intimacy, each leaning closer, each acknowledging that they were in this together, forging a union that might outlast the ghosts of war. The conversation slowed, lapsing into a peaceful silence. When Lyanna finally stood, she led Robert to the bed, letting the night draw them into its gentle darkness. She felt a cautious sort of hope blooming in her heart, a sense that maybe this marriage could truly deepen into something that would anchor them both. As they settled, the flicker of lamplight cast dancing shadows on the canopy overhead, and somewhere in the distance, the wind whistled against the towers of the Red Keep. She woke at dawn to the sound of roosters crowing from the city below. Warmth still lingered at her side, Robert stirring when the noise roused him. A thin band of orange light cut through a gap in the curtains, painting a line across the floor. Outside, the city began to wake, merchants hauling carts, dockworkers calling to each other down by the wharves, and the faint ring of forge hammers in the blacksmith's quarter. Robert rose first, stretching his broad shoulders with a grunt. He eyed the morning light with mild distaste. "I'd rather be off hunting than sitting in a council chamber." She slid out of bed, wrapping a dressing robe around herself. "I know, but we have the day's business. Tywin will be waiting." He grimaced, then softened when he looked at her. "Would you ride with me after the council, even just around the city's outskirts? I need fresh air." She smiled. "If time allows, I'd like that." Karis tapped gently at the chamber door, announcing she had fresh water for washing. Robert slipped back to his own chambers, greeting one of his squires who waited outside. Lyanna let Karis in and began her morning routine. Despite the early hour, her mind was already reeling with tasks. Checking on the new arrangement for petitions, ensuring Lord Rosby's concerns about the harvest were relayed to the Master of Coin, offering her presence at the midday meal with Tywin if Robert requested. By the time she was dressed in a simple blue gown, Ned had sent word summoning her to a short discussion before the formal council meeting. She made her way through the Red Keep, accompanied by a single guardsman, to a small solar overlooking the sea. There, she found Ned, along with Pycelle and Varys. A tray of bread, cheese, and boiled eggs awaited on a side table. The old maester rose, bowing stiffly, and Varys offered his customary graceful nod. Ned gestured for her to join them at a table strewn with parchment. "We wanted to review the status of the Crown's debts before Tywin and Robert discuss financing." Varys unfurled a scroll. "My little birds say that Lord Tywin is prepared to extend a substantial loan at a relatively modest rate, but he will expect certain guarantees. Influence on the council, among other things." Lyanna took a seat, scanning the figures that Pycelle pointed to with a gnarled finger. The Crown owed sums to the Iron Bank of Bravos, some smaller debts to houses that had backed Robert, and additional sums to coinlenders within King's Landing itself. It was a labyrinth of obligations. She pressed her lips together. "We can't let Tywin monopolize the realm's finances. That would give him too much sway." Benderal. Pycelle cleared his throat. "Yet without immediate gold, the city's reconstruction stalls. We have soldiers to pay, walls to repair, and famine relief in a few districts. The cost is mounting, Your Grace." Ned took a deep breath. "What if we negotiate for partial loans, also from House Tyrell, or even the Iron Bank again? Spread the debt so one house can hold us hostage." Varys offered a soft smile. "An excellent notion, my lord. The question is how to do so without offending Lord Tywin. He's traveled here in good faith." Lyanna recognized the delicate balance. If they turned Tywin away too harshly, he might choose to make trouble. But if they accepted his terms without question, he would effectively hold the crown in his palm. She leaned back in her chair. "We should propose a shared investment. Let Tyrell gold flow in as well, perhaps from Lord Redwyn, and we pay them back with interest, ensuring none become indispensable." Ned nodded, making a note. "We can draft a proposal before Robert meets Tywin. That way, we have a starting point." They spent the next half hour refining details, passing parchment back and forth. Varys occasionally interjected with hints about who might be persuadable. House Tyrell had an interest in securing trade routes for their produce. Redwyne wanted special privileges at port. If cleverly structured, the crown could garner multiple lines of credit and keep Tywin from overshadowing them. At length, the conversation wound down, and Lyanna rose to leave for the council chambers. Ned walked with her through the hall, the sound of their footsteps echoing on the polished floor. As they approached the doors, they saw Robert already there, conferring quietly with Tywin, Jaime, and Littlefinger. The sight made Lyanna's stomach tighten. This was it, the delicate dance. She caught Robert's eye and he gave her a slight nod. Tywin turned, his cool gaze resting on her. Jaime stepped aside with a polite bow, letting her pass. She felt a swirl of conflicting emotions: caution, determination, a faint spark of pride that she would stand beside the king in these matters. She stepped forward, chin held high, to take her seat at the table. The realm hung in the balance of every choice they made now, and she resolved once more that she would not let them falter. So began another day of negotiations, strategies, and subtle parries with House Lannister. Beyond the walls of the Red Keep, the city's life went on. Blacksmiths hammered, fisherwives hawked their catch, beggars sought alms in shadowed alleyways. The beat of 1,000 hearts merged into one vibrant pulse, looking to the throne for stability. Lyanna reminded herself of the faces she had seen in the Great Hall, of the petitioners who came seeking justice, of the men and women who wanted nothing more than a safe and prosperous life. This, more than anything, fueled her resolve. She was queen, the wolf turned stag, and she would guard the 7 kingdoms as fiercely as a she-wolf protected her own. The day stretched ahead, full of challenges. In time, she hoped, they would find a rhythm that truly united the realm. The memory of war had not yet faded, but perhaps, through careful steps and shared resolve, they could forge a future that honored all who had fallen and preserved all who lived. As she settled in beside Robert, meeting Tywin Lannister's measured stare across the table, she found herself unafraid. She remembered the swirl of illusions she had once known. But now her feet stood on solid ground, her heart tempered by loss and shaped by duty. She would not fail. Together, she and Robert would reign, forging a bond between stag and wolf that even cunning lions and distant dragons could not break. And so, the quiet struggle for peace continued, day by day, in the small rooms where deals were struck and promises exchanged, each choice like another link in a chain that bound them to the future of the 7 kingdoms.